throughout the last 250 years, France has been the indicator of where the world is going in relation to social and class struggle. Now, those of you who haven't seen, and it was quite easy to miss because the mass media barely covered and barely ever covers any major unrest in France, precisely because they know that it has historically been this spark that sets off upheaval. So, for example, in 1848, a demonstration called by students, within 3 days of the beginning of that demonstration, the King of France fled Paris with only the clothes on his back, and his entire entourage fled with him, got on a boat, came to England, landed in New Haven, and got put up in a bed and breakfast. And then to East Croydon. You don't know any Spanish, unfortunately. Then to East Croydon, and lived out his days in Surrey. And the monarchy of France was ended because of a revolution. And a revolution is the forcible entry of millions of people into governing the destiny of society. Throughout most of history, particularly in most of modern history, but all history actually, all history since primeval times, it is generally leaders. You know, we learn at school, kings, princes, lords, aristocrats, and under capitalism for the last few hundred years, lawyers, professors, in modern times, politicians, television pundits, experts, and in our most recent period, we had the era of the scientists, the SAGE committee, the mathematical modelers, the people who came on television and told you to stay at home for 2 or 2.5 years in order to protect the NHS, whereas behind the backs and behind the lies that they were telling the population, they were conspiring with Big Pharma to roll out their gigantic pharmaceutical program for the entire world's population, in which they partially failed because large swathes of the population did not submit. But a revolution is the movement of millions of people into governing the destiny of society. We had a bit of that in the anti-lockdown movement. The reason the government gave in Britain in February, March 2022 was because of the anti-lockdown protests in Britain, which turned the tide against the attempt to impose vaccine mandates on the population in Britain, starting with NHS workers and care home workers. Care home workers, unfortunately, many of them already got sacked before they had a chance, before this was overturned. Now, what's happened in France is classical return to the struggles of the working class. What is it about? The workers of France have got the right to retire at 62 years of age. A few years back, it was 60 years of age. Now, anybody knows, I'm nearly 60 myself, by the way. I'll soon be retiring, but not from speaking at Speaker's Corner. But I should be retiring from gainful employment. Although I actually retired from that quite a long time ago. But never mind, that's another subject. How are you?
Hi, my darling.
What's this, a snap?
I just
What's this? Here we go, we've got a lovely picture there. Thank you very much. £5. That's how I earn my income, madam.
Can you take one more, please?
One more?
What's your name?
What is this, a snack show? What is this, going on TikTok? Going on TikTok, you're going to jump around, take your clothes off? No, I'm not having that. So,
what's your name?
Look, I'm doing a meeting in case you didn't notice, or starting to. Get gathering closely, ladies and gentlemen, so we can crowd this woman out. That's what comes from putting these tables and chairs down here, you see. Make people think they're in a living room.
Thank you sir. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Within limits. Where was? Oh yes. So millions of people govern the outcome in society, govern what happens in society, and that is what's happened in the last few weeks, in particular in the last week in France. And Macron, that Bonapartist who likes to imagine that he controls the world, that he shapes history, that he makes the fate of France. And by the way, he turned the police violently against the yellow vest protesters, and that I think is why during the anti-lockdown protests, although France has got a long history of skepticism towards vaccine mandates, there were not so many protests in France, and there were draconian regulations. You had to register in order to leave your home with a sheet of paper with you, otherwise you could be charged, fined or arrested by the police during the whole COVID story. But in the last few weeks, as I hoped and expected, France has regained its confidence. The masses of France have regained their confidence. And that is why, when Macron did not have a parliamentary majority, he tried to force his decision to increase the age of retirement to 64 through by order. Article 49.3, I think it's called. Now what does that mean? By imposing dictatorial power to increase the working burden on the working classes of the entire country of France and all future generations. The idea is to smash the power of the working class. And what happens in France when they try to do that, on many occasions, 1789, 1848, 1830, 1871, 1819, 1936, 1968, 1945, throughout all these periods, when the French masses have moved onto the streets, they have shown the world how revolution is made. Not by cowering the corner, obeying what the police say, doing what they want. Instead of this, I remember being on a demonstration in 1985-86 in France. I went to go and attend, join up with student protests and workers' protests. And I remember being on there were elevated trains in Paris. I remember being on the metro, and there were riots taking place outside on the streets as the metro went past, and the cars were being overturned and set on fire, and a middle-class woman was sitting on, very poshly dressed, standing on the train next to me, looking out the window, and she saw these cars on fire and people rioting, and she went like that. Because in France the attitude is not like if Piers Corbyn and his friends turned the car over and set it on fire in the anti-lockdown protest, all society would have screamed, "Oh my God, how can they use violence?" And there was a protest here in Hyde Park where we did drive the police out the park, in fact 3 protests, but they were mild. A few bottles, mostly plastic bottles, were thrown. A couple of police were injured, and then they screamed in the newspaper, "Rioters attack police in Hyde Park." That was here. We were all involved. Well, many of us were involved on the day. But when that happens in France, nobody blinks an eyelid. When cars are set on fire, now they've got rubbish piling high, sky high in Paris. Nobody blinks an eyelid when they set it on fire and throw it towards the police, because they know what happened during the yellow vest protest. Many people blinded, lost their hands, lost their fingers, maimed for life by the riot police in France. You see the pictures. They're just like Robocops. Because what is happening now is the beginning of an awakening, a revolutionary awakening. Yes, people submitted to the madness of the COVID dictatorship for 2.5 years. By the way, the only other country that turned the tide just like that was China. Funny enough, the Chinese have got a lot in common with the French, funny enough, in the way they protest. A lot of the time they'll be quiet and passive, and then suddenly there'll be a small protest and it will erupt into an explosion of discontent. That is why Xi Jinping removed the lockdowns in November, December last year. Remember, they attacked us for a year and a half, claiming we're monsters, anti-vaxxers, plague rats and so on. They attacked us with lies and slander and with a conspiracy of silence. And so too they have a conspiracy of silence in France. But in China, remember, they suddenly said, heroes anti-lockdown protests. So Piers Corbyn is a plague rat. Anyone who demonstrates in Britain against the lockdowns is a madman, an anti-vaxxer, a flat earther. And when in China a few students protested, they're heroes for freedom. That's what they said. That's what they said in the news. And by the way, China, much of China never had a lockdown. Much of China, the largest part of the world that never had lockdowns, apart from parts of Africa, was China. But they don't tell people that. They want you to think. The BBC, I remember seeing a report, the BBC said China had been in lockdown for 3 years. That is a lie. China was in lockdown for, what was it, 5-6 weeks the first time, then nothing till 2022. No lockdowns till 20, or hardly any, a couple of little towns. And then about 130 or 140 million people were locked down in 2022. The rest of them not. Now, we were told, of course, that China is the most draconian on earth. Let's come back to France. If the French win, and lots hangs on this, not everything, but lots. If the French win, as in 1848, as in 1968, when the rebellion begins, Frederick Engels used to say, France is the country where the class struggle is always fought to the end. One side or the other will win. And so if they win in France against Macron, and I think they will, because you see he's coming out, he's had his game of playing the tough man. He's tried the tough man against the yellow vest. He tried the tough man during the anti-lockdown protests. And now he's trying it again, but it's the springtime. He's losing his power. Go round, you idiot! Go round, you idiot! Go round! Human beings are here, not just your silly machine. For God's sake, what an idiot!
That's what they do.
What an idiot! It's a cycle race. Get out the way. Yeah, we're humans, yeah? There's a whole load of them in front of you. Moron. So if they win by mass demonstrations, by a general strike, by rebellions on the street, and yes, if necessary, by burning down buildings and attacking the police and defeating the police in physical conflict, then as in 68, you know what happened in 68, the army said they might join. De Gaulle ran off to Morocco to mobilise forces, Algeria, to try and get the army to mobilise to attack the people. Because once the police are broken down, who's left to defend? There's only the army. And the army is composed of ordinary people. So they cannot rely upon the army. They must use the police. The problem is, if the protests, as I understand, involve 30 or 40% of the population, even in small towns and villages, 30 or 40% are protesting. What does it mean? It means you can't just use the riot police in one central area, as in Paris, where they might be able to defeat them. If it's all over the country, you won't be able to do so. And so the breach in the dam will be made and the rebellion will succeed. And then, of course, the question comes, how is power exercised? And everybody knows, not only in France, but all across Europe, the centre ground of politics, which the mainstream like to promote. They like to say, oh, Keir Starmer, he represents real politics. Or Sadiq Khan, number one enemy of Sadiq Khan.
Destroy him.
Or Rishi Sunak, steady hand Rishi, not too right, not too left, just about right, man in the middle. Soup, or better said, porridge, not too hot, not too cold. That centre ground has been destroyed by the economic collapse, by the political installation of dictatorial power, and it has no foundation left, no real material foundation. Living standards are collapsing. Prices are rising at skyrocketing rates. And that's why the workers, many of whom, some of these NHS workers, were going along with all the COVID madness. Suddenly, they're on the streets in large numbers last week, protesting, teachers, nurses, the railway workers. But they don't do, unfortunately, because of the long history of labour movement, if you like, conservatism inside the working classes in Britain, they don't experience the same explosion from below that you get in France. So one country needs to set off the tinderbox, and then the other countries will follow.
Right.
The other countries will follow, and they will not be able to conceal the news. By this time next week, they will not be able to hide the news, and it will be front page story. It will be front page news, not what Gary Lineker said on Twitter, which they want you to discuss for 2 weeks on end. Not this moronic idiocy that they want you to think is the story of the day, but the condition of working people throughout the entire planet, which is being attacked, their living standards attacked, their conditions attacked, and all sorts of totalitarian plans, utilising technology to control the working classes, to make your lives a misery, to make your lives hell, and to drive down living standards to match those in the poorest corners of the world. Because capital, even when they locked down the world and banned us from travel, capital was global. And by the way, there are even indications that the global financial collapse that happened in 2008 is about to repeat itself. We had the Silicon Valley Bank collapses, but then surprise, surprise, when everything was stabilized and Joe Biden said, we're going to nationalize the banks. That's effectively what he said. We're nationalizing the banks and we're not giving compensation to the shareholders. They said, oh, these are stupid Silicon Valley maniacs, you know, like that guy with the cryptocurrency who was arrested in Costa Rica, wherever he was hiding out. But then, a couple of days ago, not a Silicon Valley bank, Credit Suisse, the Swiss banks, bailed out to the tune of $45 billion. 45 billion. The Swiss, after all, are what the word banking means. The Swiss, stable, conservative, unchanging, permanent, cuckoo clocks and mountains. The most stable and peaceful and wealthy country in Europe, possibly the world, on the verge of economic collapse. Now, if that doesn't tell you where we're heading, I assure you nothing else will. Price rise, they talk about, oh, we're going to give the teachers or the NHS the 5%. But anybody knows the price of butter in 2020 was £1.20 in Tesco's local. £1.20, £1.25. It's £2.50 now. 100% increase in prices of butter. Electricity, they're going to subsidise you until next month. And then, and when they subsidise you, who are they subsidising? They're subsidising the gas and electricity companies. They're raking in billions and billions. In the pandemic, what happened? The greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in world history. Before 2020, Elon Musk had a total personal wealth of $25 billion. By the way, $10 billion would eradicate hunger on Earth. $10 billion. 6 million people die of hunger every year. Far more than the highest claims of the pandemic in 3 years. Every year, 6 million die. And 10 billion. So in other words, less than half of the wealth that Elon Musk had in 2020 would have solved that problem, and he still would have had 15 billion left over. But during the pandemic, by magic, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, the directors of Apple, the leaders of BlackRock, the leaders of Google, the leaders of Amazon, their wealth skyrocketed into the stratosphere. From 25 billion, Elon Musk went up to 225 billion. 225 billion. The greatest inequality in the history of humanity. The pharaohs had nothing on what the inequality is today. And they treat human beings in India, Africa, Asia, South America, in Europe in the same way. That's why the battle in France is important.
That's right.
They intend to drive the living standards of the people of the whole of Europe down, down, down. That's the aim. And in the name of what? In the name of fighting the Russians. So apparently, when the COVID ended and the war with Russia began, of course we're not at war with Russia, the Ukrainians fight on NATO's behalf. And then they said, Vladimir Putin should be put on trial as a war criminal. This was what they said a couple of days ago. Now, how come Joe Biden and his buddies blew up the supply of gas, having laid the bombs before the war began in December 2021? They already laid the bomb in preparation to blow it up. They planned the war. By the way, in the week before the war began, they were telling us, it was unprovoked. Nothing could possibly explain Russia's action. They launched 2,500 missiles from the west into the Donbass region, attacking the people there. In that 1 week before the war began. Now they said, the latest news, they said, Xi Jinping is in Moscow tomorrow. What's he doing in Moscow? And he's talking, apparently, to Zelensky. So why is the West all upset? Why are they screaming suddenly about Putin going to war crimes tribunal? I don't remember Tony Blair ending up in a war crimes tribunal. Although he said there were weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons in Iraq. I don't remember George Bush going to the War Crimes Tribunal for attacking Afghanistan, although all the people who bombed or who supposedly destroyed the World Trade Center in 2001 were from Saudi Arabia, the ally of the United States, now ally of China. And the Chinese, this is why you see last week, they barely reported that the Chinese made a deal between the Iranians and the Saudis. Why would the Saudis abandon the Americans? Because America has been doing fracking. So he gets his oil and gas from inside America now. He no longer needs Saudi Arabia. So they dumped Saudi Arabia. Having been dumped like the abandoned girlfriend or boyfriend, the Saudi Arabians have decided their butter is no longer spread by the Americans. So they think, okay, let's make a deal with the Chinese. So they made their deal with the Chinese. Do you not think Zelensky is even thinking that now? The Chinese are coming to them and saying, we will rebuild Ukraine. Within 5 years, it will be wealthy. Within 5 years, all the housing will be built and more. You'll have industry, you'll have railways, you'll have transportation, you'll have facilities. Or you can carry on and see what happens, the destruction that happens. So the Americans, they start upping the ante. And the Brits. The British government, Rishi Sunak last week, he said, the main enemy, your enemy, by the way, our government says, this is your enemy, is the Chinese. Because the Chinese are threatening Taiwan. And Taiwan, you know, belongs to England. Apparently, Taiwan is English, just like Hong Kong used to be. They go on about democracy in Hong Kong. I remember going to Hong Kong in 1989, just after Tiananmen Square. Was there freedom and democracy in Hong Kong when the British were in control of Hong Kong? You did not have the right to vote. You did not have the right to strike and demonstrate, except very restricted regulations from the British authorities. Britain exercised a dictatorship over Hong Kong. And by the way, how did they get Hong Kong? They had 2 wars to force the Chinese to take opium, where they bombed China and humiliated China, the British. So when they talk this rubbish about democracy in China, Taiwan wasn't a democracy. Taiwan was a dictatorship until 1991. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Taiwan was dictatorship. So what are they talking about? You know, and now they say, you see, the only way to fight these people is from the streets, you know. You fight from the streets in your own country against your own leaders. Well, yes, but then they have to be beaten themselves. They have to be taught a bit of a lesson. That's the fact of the matter. And when you have sufficient masses of people behind you, no police force on earth can tolerate. And you'll see, I remember, this is why they went mad about our demonstrations in Hyde Park. Because when we drove the police out of Hyde Park, 3 times they ran away. They ran away from us. We could see their faces when they were in fear, when they got back what they gave us. Then suddenly they began to panic. Their ranks were breaking. I remember one of the Indian police officers started swinging around and he attacked one of his own officers. He hit one of his own officers because they lost punch drunk. They lost control of their brain. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing. But you see, once you have enough power, they only recognize power, these people. That's all it's about. They only recognize force. And that's why we have to link arms internally in this country. Those of us who are against vaccine mandates, those of us who are against the lockdown, we have to reach out to those who took the vaccines. We have to reach out to those who supported the lockdowns. And in that way we win over the majority of people. The majority is now on our side. So we need to reach out to the trade unions, to the workers, to appeal to them, to mobilize them, to smash the power of the state and to demand our demands, what we want. That is what we can learn from what is happening in France at the moment, and I hope it will be a victory over the next week or 2 where they smash the power of the state. And you see the police breaking down and some police join the protesters. That's what happened, by the way, in '68. The police joined the protesters. The CRS went on strike. The riot police went on strike. Similar processes will happen here. Never underestimate the power of the mass of people when they're organised and determined to achieve their ends.
That's right.
Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Please.